Hello, my holy brothers and sisters. It is Monday, February 17th, President's Day. Let us light up the darkness. All right. Let's see who's going to be joining us on this Monday, President's Day. Who's tuning in? Where are you tuning in from? Remember, when you comment, it signals to Facebook that we are doing something of value. We light up the darkness and more people get an opportunity to see it because the algorithm will promote our show. James Roth in the house from Indianapolis. Great to see you here, James. Who else is with us? If you're watching later when we're not live, we're still curious. Where are you tuning in from? Ron Belt's in the house from Lexington, Tennessee. We are going to be Robin Stewart from Ohio. Susan Beltz is in the house. How are you feeling, Susan? I know we were praying for you that you should have a successful healing. Pauline is in from Little Rock, Jordan, from Fredericksburg, Virginia. Do we have anyone from outside the United States? Are we international at this moment? Martha from Florida. All right, let us review where we are, where we've been, where we're going. We're in Tractate 1 of the Talmud, Berachos. We've just opened chapter 7. And now we are reviewing the requirement to say the grace after meals and the sort of procedure for doing it, right? We not only have we said that we have a requirement, we have an obligation. A Jew has an obligation to recite the grace after meal. It's a Torah obligation. We see in the Torah, in Deuteronomy, that when you have eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless the Lord your God for the food and for the land, or for the land and for the food. So that's where the requirement to do the Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals, comes from. And now we're discussing how do we do it, right? We started talking about yesterday the Zimmun, the invitation to bless. And we're going to continue that discussion today. And we're actually going to continue it. And I'm sorry, I'm just seeing Susan says a little rough, but I'm still kicking. That a lady. I was going to say that a girl, but maybe that's not politically correct these days. So well done. And may we hear nothing but good news about your healing, Susan. Okay, so we'll start this discussion we're on page 46, right? So we are on page 46 of the Talmud. That is Daf Mem Vav, okay? So we start with an incident. Rabbi Zahra became ill. So Rabbi Zahra is one of those great personalities in the Talmud. He was born in Babylonia, in Bavel, but ascended to the Holy Land, to Israel. He was a third generation Amora, so he was of the generation of the sages of the Gemara, as opposed to the earlier sages of the Mishnah. The Amoraim were the sages of the Gemara period, and the Tanaim were the sages of the Mishnah period. So Rabbi Zahra was a third generation Amora. He was really the Babylonia was actually a more, there was just more learning going on in Babylonia at that time because the sages were free to live and to learn and to teach in Babylonia more than they were in the Holy Land, which was under Roman domination and control. And really, the Jews were being persecuted and pressured, and it was just not as much Torah learning possible in the Holy Land. But of course, so much of Judaism is about being in the Holy Land, and all of these blessings are we bless God for the land. When we say that, we mean for the Holy Land. So these sages who were really devoted, even though life was much harder in the Holy Land, some of them would make that choice. And it was a very difficult choice for them because the most important thing for them was Torah learning and Torah study. That was easier to do in Babylonia, but some of them just wanted to be, in the Holy Land anyway. And Rabbi Zahra was one of those. He ascended to Yisrael and was learning and teaching there. right? So if he's an Amora, so this is roughly in that period between the years 200 and 600 of the Common Era. He's third generation, so it's probably in the, about the 300-400s. Okay, so Rabbi Zahra became ill, right? He was a very pious man, very beloved by his colleagues. He became ill. We'll assume he was, somewhat seriously ill. And Rabbi Abahu performed the great mitzvah of visiting the sick. We've talked about this many times. This is very important to visit the sick, right? We have a teaching, we're going to come to it later, I think in this volume, that when we visit a sick person, it's like we remove 1/60th of their illness. Certainly we comfort them by being there. And this is one of those mitzvahs, one of those commandments that has no limit, right? You can visit sick people all day long. The more you do it, the better. And you'll receive a reward for visiting the sick, both in this world and in the world to come. And I dare say that while this may not be an obligation of the non-Jew, it is equally wise and equally meritorious to visit the sick. Maybe, we have a tradition that it's somehow it's more meritorious to do something you're obliged to do than something you volunteer to do. But this task, this work, this fine, beautiful, holy work of visiting the sick is so important that I dare say, and this is just Sal speaking from his own opinion, no authority, but I dare say that the merits for this, the reward for this, and the loveliness of visiting the sick extends to all, okay, to Jews and non-Jews. If you ever have that opportunity to go visit somebody who's sick and comfort them, do it, okay. So, Rabbi Abahu went to visit Rabbi Zahra. While he was there, he made a resolution. So you can imagine that while he was there, he prayed for Rabbi Zahra's healing. And then he made, I wouldn't call it a vow. It's not called a vow, it's called a resolution. But basically he said, if Rabbi Zahra is healed, I will make a feast for the sages, right? It's like a prayer that he's coupling to almost like encouraging God to step in, right, and do this healing. He's going to do a very good thing, a very good deed, make a feast for the sages. In other words, feed a whole bunch of Torah scholars. It's a way of promoting Torah study. And he said, if Rabbi Zahra will be healed, so I will make a feast for the sages. And Rabbi Zahra was healed. And Rabbi Abahu kept his word. He made a feast for the sages. And of course, at this feast, he felt like his guest of honor was Rabbi Zahra, in whose name this feast was called. Right? It was the feast was created as a kind of I wouldn't call it a bribe, right? But an encouragement to God, like an extra prayer to God. Look, we're all praying for him. Please, God, heal him. And if you'll heal him, so I'm going to make this feast for all the sages. Zahra was healed. Now we're having that feast. Rabbi Zahra attends the feast at Rabbi Abahu's house. And Rabbi Abahu, to honor Rabbi Zahra, invites him to recite the blessing over bread before the meal, right? To open the meal with the blessing over the bread. Rabbi Zahra says, don't you hold by the rule that the host breaks bread, and that rule is in keeping with Rabbi Yochanan, right? Because Rabbi Yochanan said the host should break bread, right? He should bless the bread. In other words, whenever we break bread, wash first. So the host washes his hands, and then he recites the blessing over the bread, and it should be the host who does that, not even if they have a super prominent guest, right? So even if they have like the most prominent sage in the world, but he comes to your house, so still the host should be the one who breaks the bread, not the most prominent person at the meal. Why should the host be the one who breaks the bread? Per Rabbi Yochanan, the host should be the one who breaks the bread because the host will break bread generously. Right? So you can imagine that somebody who comes to your house and is going to be, asked to make the blessing over the bread, but it's not his bread. The host is providing the bread, so he might think, oh, I don't know how much bread there is. I don't want to be presumptuous and give too much bread to other people. So the custom became and remains that the host is the one who blesses and breaks the bread, per the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. At the end of the feast, Rabbi Abahu invited Rabbi Zahra to lead the grace after the meal, the Birkat Hamazon. Rabbi Zahra tried to decline again. He said, don't you hold by the opinion of Rabbi Huna of Babylonia, who says that the one who blessed the bread, right, the one who blessed the bread at the beginning, should be the one to lead the grace after the meal? Answer, no, we do not hold that way, right? The answer was then and now, we hold by the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that a guest should lead the benching, should lead the grace after the meal, right? In Yiddish, it's called benching. Benching means blessing, but it should be a guest who leads the grace after the meal. Why? Why does Shimon Bar Yochai hold, and we still hold, that a guest should lead the grace after the meal? Reason, because when a guest leads benching in the home of a host, a little blessing is added to the grace after meals, and the blessing that is added is blessing the host, right? The host just provided this wonderful meal for everyone who is present, and it's considered good manners to now bless the host for his generosity, and the host can't bless himself, so a guest leads the benching and adds the blessing for the host. And what is the blessing that is added to the grace after meals by the guest in order to bless the host? It's a lovely little blessing. Let me read it to you. Imagine if everybody at every meal who was hosted by somebody would say this at the end as part of the thank you. May it be your will, right? To God you say, may it be your will that the master of the house shall not suffer shame in this world, nor humiliation in the world to come. Why would somebody suffer humiliation in the world to come? Because, they sinned, right? We suffer humiliation in the next world as a punishment and a refinement of all our wrongdoings in this world. So when you say that, may he suffer no humiliation in the world to come, it's like you're praying for him that he will have strength, that your host will have strength and not succumb to temptations and sins, right? And may he not be shamed in this world, right? So may he not sin in this world and be exposed. And, may he not, may it not happen that other people, impinge the honor of the host, right? It's really a lovely blessing. You're saying, may you be strong, may you be strengthened, may the Lord strengthen you, and may you be respected, right? That nobody would shame or humiliate you, right? So may this host who has served our meal for us, may this person be prominent and respected by all. It's a lovely blessing to add at the end of the meal. Now, this did not become part of this standard addition by a guest on behalf of a host, but we do read that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, so this was earlier, right, than the people who were involved here. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was the one who redacted the Mishnah. So he's the last of the Tanaim, essentially. And he says, so Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi added to it elements pertaining to material success as well. Not just that he should be prominent and respected and be strengthened spiritually and emotional so that he should not succumb to sin, but also, and may he be very successful with all his possessions, and may his possessions and our possessions be successful and near the city, and may Satan control neither his deeds nor our deeds, and may no thought of sin, iniquity, or transgression stand before him or before us from now and forevermore. A lovely, lovely blessing that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi used to add at the end of a meal when he was the guest and leading the benching. And some people will add that blessing still. It's nice to wish for the material success of your host. Some people will always ask when we mention Satan, right? Here, and he's saying that, Yehuda Hanasi said, may Satan control neither his deeds nor our deeds. Now that sounds a little bit, like the popular conception in American culture of who Satan is. That some kind of power who is just evil and seeking to tempt us into evil all the time. But that's actually not a Jewish conception, according to our sages, of who Satan is. Satan is the adversary, but he's an angel who works for God. Right? He's not in charge of some other realm, and in any way, equal to or anything remotely approaching, a power in our world, that would balance out the power of God. Not at all. The Satan in the Jewish conception is more like a prosecutor. He's like the heavenly prosecutor. Like, forget federal prosecutor. He's the heavenly prosecutor, right? But his job, is to work on behalf of God and to point to people in the world who are doing wrong and say, that one is doing wrong, right? Now, sometimes the way that works is he'll say, well, that person is living righteously, but secretly they're not so strong. Their faith is not so strong. Their good is not so strong. If they were put into the path of temptation, if things weren't so fortunate for this person, so they would stumble quickly. And that's what happened in the book of Job, right? The story of Job, in Hebrew, Eov. He was rich and having a lovely life and was a very, very righteous, God-fearing, God-loving man. But Eov said, yeah, but you know what? It's only because things are going well for him that he's so God-loving and God-fearing. Let's take away all his good fortune and see how he does, right? So that was the role of Satan. But it's not like Satan, was this devil or evil incarnate, sort of trying to tempt us from the other realm. Satan works for God, okay? And was given that role. And it's not a job, by the way, that Satan enjoys, but it's one he has, been tasked to do. Okay, let me continue. So that was the blessing, right? So Rabbi Zahra, acquiesced and led the benching as he was asked to do by Rabbi Abahu in Abahu's house, since Abahu was the host. Let us continue. That was the guest blessing. Now, let's say we have a situation, and I see that some people donated, and thank you so much. And I'm going to scroll back a little bit later to not interrupt the flow so that I can thank everyone who did at the end. And I will also take questions and comments at the end of the teaching. So if you have a question or comment, put it in the comments and I'll scroll up at the end. Okay, so now let's say we have a situation where a bunch of people are eating together, like, for example, right, at Abahu and Zahra's house, or it could be in a restaurant, anywhere this happens. And we've already established yesterday that it is preferable, right, that when we bench after the meal, that we are also able to fulfill the commandment. We saw two sources from it, from King David and from Moses, that, when I praise the Lord, you shall praise with me. That was the basic idea. And so if we have three or more at the meal, so one of them will make an invitation to bless after the meal, and the other two or more will respond. Let's say that there's just three people there, or maybe there's a bunch. Let's say there's a bunch of people, 5 or 6 people. 2 of them are done, right? 2 of them are done. They need to leave. So they'd like to make a Zimmun, make this invitation to bless, and then bench, right? But there's only 2 of them who want to do that. The rest of the people are still eating. So they ask, will somebody, answer for us, right? So join our Zimmun so we can make a Zimmun, right? So we can make the invitation to bless. So let's say I volunteer, okay, I'll interrupt my meal so that I can answer your Zimmun, and then I'll go back to eating. So how will I do that? How does that procedure work? So one of them will make the invitation, right? And then two of us have to answer. So his partner who wants to leave with him and me. I will answer the call to blessing, and then I will stay with him until he finishes the first blessing of the grace after meals, which is after the actual invitation. The invitation is, gentlemen, let us say the blessings, and the people answer, may the name of the Lord be blessed from now into all eternity. The leader says, may the name of the Lord be blessed from now into all eternity. With your permission, esteemed guest, let us bless him, of whose bounty we have eaten. And the others answer, blessed be he of whose bounty we have eaten and by whose goodness we live. And then we go into the grace, right? And the first blessing of the grace is, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who in his goodness provides sustenance for the entire world with grace, with kindness, and with mercy. He gives food to all flesh, for his kindness is everlasting. Through his great goodness to us continuously, we do not lack food, and may we never lack food for the sake of his great name. For he, benevolent God, provides nourishment and sustenance for all, does good to all, and prepares food for all his creatures whom he has created. As it is said, you open your hand and satisfy the desire of every living being. That's a line from Psalm 145, and it's an important line that we say every day with concentration. We try to say it at least 3 times a day. You open your hand and satisfy the desire of every living thing. And then the blessing, blessed are you, Lord, who provides food for all. That is the end of the first paragraph of the grace after the meal. And I, who am still eating, right, but interrupted to join the Zimmun, I join them until they finish the first paragraph, and I bless with them. Then I go back to eating. Right? Because I didn't finish my meal. I just joined them so that they could make that Zimmun that requires 3 people. Now I finish my meal. When I'm done, I still need to bless after my own meal. Do I start over again from the very beginning? No. Because if I did, then the blessing that I made with them would have been a blessing in vain. And we avoid that at all costs. It's a very important principle. Many of these rules that we've been discussing, one of the reasons why the sages are so particular with the blessings is to avoid making a blessing in vain. We at all costs avoid the situation where we made a blessing that we weren't supposed to make, because that is tantamount to taking the Lord's name in vain. So I made a blessing with them over the food that I'm eating, but then I go back to eating. So when I finish eating, I go back to the grace after meal and I pick up where I left off. In other words, I pick up at the second paragraph. Got it? If I interrupt my meal to join a Zimmun, I join them through the end of the first paragraph, then I finish my meal, and then I resume my own benching where I left off, meaning I start with the second paragraph. All right, I hope that's clear. If we are at a Shiva, right? So a Shiva is when someone dies, when a Jew dies, right? The mourners are going to sit Shiva. They're going to sit in the house on low chairs for 7 days. And the community will take care of their meals, right? That's why community is so important for all people in all places. But especially to live as an observant Jew, it's almost impossible without doing it in a Jewish community. Almost impossible. It's very difficult. So one of the things that happens is when, God forbid, you have a death in the family, right? Yeah, you're a mourner, so you're sitting Shiva. So all the meals people are gonna take care of it, right? You know, sort of family members who are available, who are not direct mourners, or friends will come over, just members of the community. So there's gonna be a bunch of meals served, like group meals, in the house of the mourner, okay? So the situation's going to come up that there's going to be benching in the house of the mourner. Now there's going to be some adjustments made to the benching. Benching is sometimes very quiet and, somewhat rushed. Other times it's very joyful and sung. So when the benching's going to happen, the grace after meal is going to happen in the house of the mourner, we're going to tone it down, right? We're not going to sing kind of raucously. And we're going to make a little adjustment to the text of the grace after the meal. In the 4th paragraph, where we say, he is a God who is good and does good for all. Let me get to that paragraph. After he is the one who rebuilds Jerusalem. So he has done, right? So, who is good and does good to all each and every day. So in the fourth blessings, blessed are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, benevolent God, our Father, our King, our strength, our Creator, our Redeemer, our Maker, our Holy One, the Holy One of Jacob, our Shepherd, the Shepherd of Israel, the King, who is good and does good to all each and every day. He has done good for us, he does good for us, and he will do good for us. He has bestowed, he bestows, and he will forever bestow upon us grace, kindness, and mercy, relief, salvation, and success. Right? So we're doing a long list of praises here of how good God is and how giving he is and how he gives us everything that we need and he's constantly kind for us, etc. But we're saying that now in the house of a mourner. So it's a little bit difficult, right? I mean, to talk about how good God is and how he gives us everything, but now we're aware that this is happening, and for the mourners, right, they're crushed. I mean, they're in a state of recent mourning, right? If we're in death, within 7 days of the death. So we just make a small adjustment. And I'm highlighting this because it's important to understand this Jewish view of God's role at the time of a death, right? So when the grace after meal is being recited in a house of mourning, we only make a small change. We only make a small change, and that is that when we cite the paragraph of God who is good and does good in the house of the mourner, we say also, blessed is the one who is good and does good, and Rabbi Akiva says, blessed is God, the true judge, right? We add that. And Mar Zutra happened to come to Rav Ashi's home when an incident of mourning befell Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi was in mourning, and Mar Zutra began a combined blessing in the grace after the meal, and he added, God who is good and does good, God of truth, the true judge, who judges with righteousness, takes away with justice, and is the ruler of his world to do in it as he wills. As all his ways are just, that all is his, and we are his people and his servants, and in everything we are obligated to thank him and bless him, who repairs the breaches in Israel, and who will repair this breach in Israel with life. Who will repair this breach in Israel for life. So this is very important. We haven't adopted this particular formula, okay? We don't do it like that. And in fact, in this prayer book, it doesn't say anything about if we're in the house of a mourner, what we say. So I don't think this is normative custom. But what for sure is a normative custom today is that when we hear that somebody has died, we say, blessed is the Lord, the true judge. Blessed is the Lord who is the true judge, right? In Hebrew, Baruch Dayan Emet. Blessed be the true judge. And so we're saying, if we've lost somebody, right? Okay, we don't tell the mourner what he should say. The mourner does what he wants to do. But when we hear that someone has died, there's a commandment to bless God for the good as well as for the bad as well as for the good, right? And so if for some reason God had a reason to take this person out of the world, now we may not know what that reason is. We don't understand why people are taken when they're taken, especially, God forbid, when a young person is taken prematurely. But we have faith that God, though we may not understand the reason, God has a reason, right? There was a reason. It was not random. God is a true judge, and so whatever God did in the world, there's a reason for it. We may not understand it ever while we are a living human, but we have faith that when we're in the world of souls, we're more likely to understand it. And even if we don't understand it then, we have faith that God had a reason, and it was a good reason. It was a necessary reason. And so when we meet the news of someone's death, we say, blessed, Baruch Dayan Emet. blessed is the true judge. And that's what I wanted to highlight here, is this philosophy. And then I love, though we don't add it into the Berachos in the House of Mourning, still the sentiment here, the way that Mar Zutra said it in the home of Rav Ashi, right? That God, even he has taken from you, but he's the one who judges with righteousness. He takes away with justice, and he's the ruler of his world, and he will do as he wills, but all his ways are just. That all is his, and his people and his servants, and in everything we are obligated to thank him and bless him, to bless him who repairs this breach in Israel, right? Meaning that if somebody has died, it's serious, right? It's not just a loss for the family member. It's not just a loss for the spouse or the child or, God forbid, a parent. Obviously, it's a loss for them. But all of us are diminished, right? When a member of our community dies, and our faith is that this breach which has opened, right? When we all lost this member of our community, so we have all experienced this breach, but somehow this breach will be filled, right? Because God loves us, and God is kind, and God is just, right? Moving on. Okay, so now we have another matter of etiquette, as it were. So again, we have a party, right? So there's a bunch of people eating together. And so this question is like, how are we going to handle? We already said that the host should bless the bread, right? He should wash and break the bread himself, and a guest should recite the grace after the meals. But if there's many guests, so which guest? And how do we handle that procedure? So ideally, we want the most prominent guest, or at least the one we judge to be the most prominent that day, like the one we want to honor, is going to be the one to recite the grace after the meal. Obviously, if this person is capable of reciting the grace after meals, maybe his Hebrew's not good enough, maybe he doesn't feel up to it, maybe he's ill that day for whatever reason, he may not be able to do it that day, then we ask somebody else. But the procedure, once we reach the end of the meal, is that okay, so I'm sorry, let me back up a step here. In the ancient world, right, so a fancy dinner party would not be a bunch of people sitting in chairs around a large table with candles on it, right? The way we imagine a dinner party. For them, the prominent wealthy individuals who have the time and leisure to eat a big meal with lots of different foods and have conversation that goes on for hours so they can discuss lofty things. So they would have that situation. They would be reclining on their side on divans, right, like sort of couches, and they would have individual tables for their meal, each in front of his divan, right? So in that situation, and let's say we're not in somebody's house, let's say we're making a meal like in a hall somewhere, so then the greatest individual in the room, or if we're in somebody's house, the host, right? So he would at the beginning of the meal, he would wash his hands first, and then, so that he wouldn't have to wait for everybody else to wash their hands before he can break the bread, he would actually wash and then get on his divan, and then they bring him the bread right there, and he blesses and eats, right? And then that can count for everybody, but he doesn't wait for everybody to have finished washing their hands and get ready. That's how they did it. Today, where we sit in tables and chairs, obviously it's much more common that we would all wash our hands, and then we would come to the table, and then the host would break the bread. When there's a lot of people washing their hands, like at a big Shabbos dinner, for example, so there can be quite a while of waiting until everybody finishes washing. And if the most prominent individual washed first, so he's now at the table waiting for the longest amount of time, which is almost like we wanted to honor him because he's the most prominent, but now he's the one who's forced to wait the longest before he can actually bless and eat. So some sort of reverse it and have the most prominent person wash last, so he's going to have the least interruption between washing and getting to the table and breaking bread and blessing and breaking the bread. One thing that is for sure is that we don't want to have a conversational interruption between washing the hands and making the blessing over the bread. So if you've ever been to a Shabbos dinner, you may remember that it's pretty much universal custom these days that from the time you've washed your hands until you're given a piece of bread to eat, you don't talk, right? You will answer amen for a blessing, or if you're the leader who's going to recite the blessing over the bread, you'll speak that. But otherwise, no conversation, no talk. We might actually sing without words and just kind of like hum or make a nigun like la 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 la, but we won't speak words so that we can remain, kind of focused and in the process of washing and blessing without a conversational interruption. At the end of the meal, as we've discussed before, we signal the clear end of a meal by washing again. And this is very much a ritual washing where we just pour a little water over our fingertips. Right? Who washes first when there's a lot of people present at the end of a meal? So according to our sages, and this is the halacha, if there's a lot of people, so you actually pass the mayim acharonim, the waters for washing after the meal, to the least prominent person at the meal, like the youngest, right? You'd pass it to, just somebody who happens to be young or a student, but not one of the distinguished rabbis who are present, right? You pass it to the youngest and least prominent, and then that person just starts passing it around the table. Everybody washes their fingertips. And then when it gets to the last 5 people, meaning you started with the least prominent, so now like the waters should be working their way to the most prominent people at the table. When you reach the last 5, now you go to the most prominent and give him the water. Why? Because he is going to lead the grace after the meal. And so we said when we have 5 people when we have 5 or less, right, then you just give the waters to the most prominent person so he has a moment to get ready, collect himself, and then he's going to lead the grace after the meal. But when there's 100 people there, 95 wash their hands so that we're ready for the blessing. Now give it to the most prominent person. He washes his fingertips, he gets himself ready. The other 4 of the most prominent 5 then wash their fingertips, and now we're ready. And that's the procedure for getting the grace going after the meal. Okay, that's it. Those are the things that I wanted to cover today. Let me scroll back in the comments and see what's going on here. Jordan Stein says, so if I understand, if you join a Zimmun and bolt after the first blessing, then when you return after your meal, you must bench alone rather than join another Zimmun when you're done. So it was different. It was like, well, you're joining the Zimmun not to bolt, but just to join them because they're going to leave. But the people who are leaving, they make a Zimmun and finish, right? You can't leave. You need to make a grace after meal at the place where you ate, right? That's the correct way to do it. So those people are going to, start their grace after the meal and finish it. But let's say there's only 2 of them. I interrupt my meal to join their Zimmun, do those first couple blessings with them. They go on, continue, complete the grace after the meal, and leave. I just did the first blessing of the grace after the meal. Now I finish my meal, and then I just pick up where I left off, but still in the same location where I'm eating. Okay. Steve Wiseman donated. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Steve. We are really grateful for your support of Accidental Talmudist, and you are our partner in sharing Torah with the world. It is a great merit for you and your family. And was there, I think this is frozen. No. Okay, that's as far back as I can go with the comments. Okay. And then there was anything else? Question, and no more questions that I can see. Okay, so that is what we wanted to share today. Tomorrow, with God's help, we will continue with page 47, Daf Mem Zion. And I would imagine, I'm not sure what my schedule is tomorrow, but probably it's going to be, middle of the day, probably about 11 a.m. Pacific, maybe noon Pacific. As far as I know, the schedule will accommodate that. Sending you all big love from LA on this President's Day, and may you all grow in wisdom constantly.